When Maya Brooks walked into the courtroom, she wasn't there to make an impression. At just 16 years old, she wasn't even supposed to be here alone. But circumstances had left her no choice. Facing a dismissive judge, an experienced attorney, and a case that seemed stacked against her, Maya had one thing they didn't expect: the brilliance to turn everything around. You're watching Just Dark, where true stories of injustice, resilience, and unexpected triumph come to life. If you're ready for more gripping stories, subscribe now, and let's uncover the truth together. When Maya Brooks walked into that courtroom, she didn't have a lawyer by her side, a flashy suit, or even the luxury of knowing she was guaranteed a fair shot. She was alone, a 16-year-old girl standing in a room filled with skeptical eyes and an intimidating white-haired judge. The eyes that followed her weren't just filled with doubt about her case, they were filled with doubt about her very existence. She'd never been in a courtroom before, never stood at the defense table of a case that could change her life. The only thing she had were the pages she'd carefully stacked in her folder, pages that spoke of legal precedents and facts, all learned from the books her late parents had left behind. Her parents, both respected lawyers, had taught her everything they knew before they died in a car accident the year before. Since their passing, Maya had learned to navigate a world that constantly reminded her of how little people expected from someone like her. A young black girl, barely out of high school, standing alone in a legal system that didn't seem to care. It was a simple traffic dispute that had brought her to court that morning. Or so it seemed on the surface. But to Maya it was a matter of justice. The officer who had pulled her over a few weeks ago had written up a ticket, claiming she had run a stop sign, a charge she knew wasn't true. She hadn't run that stop sign. But Maya wasn't the kind of person to just accept something as simple as a traffic ticket. Not after what happened to her parents. Not after everything she'd had to teach herself about standing up for what's right. The officer had been quick to accuse her, quick to write that ticket as though it were just another routine matter. But Maya wasn't about to let that happen. She had no legal representation. She had no allies. Just the law, her mind, and the quiet determination that had kept her going through the hardest year of her life. As the bailiff called her name, Maya stood, her legs trembling for a moment before she steadied herself. The courtroom was quiet, every eye on her as she made her way to the defendant's table. She glanced at the judge, who barely looked up from his notes. There was no respect in his gaze. And then there was the opposing attorney, standing tall and confident, as though the case was already decided. Maya sat down, set her folder in front of her, and looked at them both. This wasn't going to be easy. But Maya wasn't here for easy. Maya stepped into the courtroom, dressed in a simple outfit that reflected her modest circumstances. Her clothes weren't flashy, just clean and pressed, the way her parents had always taught her to present herself. She clutched her folder tightly as she walked to the defendant's table, acutely aware of the whispers in the room. The judge glanced up briefly, his expression betraying a flicker of doubt before he returned to shuffling his papers. The opposing attorney leaned over to whisper something to the judge, and both men exchanged knowing smirks. Maya didn't have to guess what they were thinking. She'd seen that look before. As she settled into her seat, the judge leaned forward and asked, "Miss Brooks, are you certain you want to proceed without legal counsel? Do you even know what this entails?" His tone was dripping with condescension, as if her mere presence at that table was some kind of inconvenience. Maya nodded calmly and responded, "Yes, Your Honor." She kept her voice steady, refusing to let his skepticism rattle her. The opposing attorney chuckled softly under his breath, clearly unimpressed. He stood confidently, his expensive suit and polished demeanor signaling his certainty that this would be an easy win. As he addressed the court, his tone bordered on patronizing, as though he were speaking more to entertain the room than to present his case. When the officer was called to the stand, he approached with the air of someone who had done this countless times before. His testimony was methodical, rehearsed, and filled with coded language that barely masked his bias. He described Maya as nervous and out of place, emphasizing how she was driving in a neighborhood where he implied she didn't belong. She was jittery, looking around a lot, the officer said confidently, as though his observations alone were enough to seal her guilt. "I could tell something wasn't right." He went on to detail the alleged violation, painting a picture of recklessness and disregard for the law. Maya didn't react. She sat quietly at her table, pen in hand, jotting down notes with an almost robotic precision. Her face remained unreadable, even as the officer's words hung in the air, feeding the unspoken assumptions in the room. To everyone watching, it seemed like the case was already decided. The judge watched her carefully, still doubtful. The opposing attorney leaned back in his chair, his smirk growing wider with every word the officer spoke. But Maya didn't flinch. She kept her focus on her notes, waiting for her turn. When the judge finally called on Maya to present her case, the courtroom seemed to collectively hold its breath. For a moment, there was silence as she stood and carefully adjusted her folder. Her movements were deliberate, her expression calm. She stepped forward, clutching her papers in one hand and a printed packet in the other. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady but not loud, "I intend to demonstrate that the officer's account of the incident is not only inconsistent but entirely unsubstantiated by the evidence." Her words carried a confidence that no one expected, least of all the judge. He raised an eyebrow but gestured for her to proceed. The opposing attorney leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his smirk unshaken. Maya walked to the defense table and held up a stack of papers. "This is a copy of the officer's written report from the day of the incident," she said. In it, the officer states that the stop occurred at 4:15 p.m. at the corner of Maplewood and 7th Street. She paused for a moment, letting the details sink in. Then she placed the report down and continued. "However, according to the traffic surveillance cameras located at that exact intersection, footage I obtained through a public records request, my vehicle came to a complete stop at 4:13 p.m., and there was no sign of any other car or pedestrian present at the time." Maya held up printed stills from the camera footage, each marked with timestamps. She walked toward the bench and handed them to the judge. The judge glanced at the papers, his neutral expression faltering ever so slightly as he scanned the images. "The time discrepancy is important," Maya explained, her voice unwavering. "Because if the stop occurred at 4:15 p.m. as the officer claims, then he would have pulled me over for something that didn't happen. These images show that I followed the law, coming to a complete stop and only proceeding when it was safe." The judge leaned back, rubbing his chin. The opposing attorney quickly stood. "Your Honor, this is circumstantial at best. Camera footage isn't definitive proof of what happened at the moment of the stop. It doesn't show the entire sequence of events." Maya didn't flinch. "You're absolutely correct," she replied, turning to face the attorney. "Which is why I also have a copy of the officer's dashcam footage. It captures the entire stop and corroborates that I was driving safely, well within the speed limit, and that I stopped at the intersection. The footage also shows that the officer initiated the stop approximately 20 seconds after I had already left the intersection. I have queued the relevant portion for review." The courtroom murmured as Maya handed over the dashcam USB to the bailiff, who plugged it into the court's monitor. The screen flickered and then the dashcam footage played. Just as Maya described, her car slowed to a complete stop at the intersection, waited briefly, then proceeded. 20 seconds later, the officer's patrol car appeared in the footage, turning in the opposite direction to pursue her. Maya turned back to the officer, her voice sharper now. "Officer Williams, you testified earlier that you observed me running the stop sign. Can you explain how your patrol vehicle wasn't even facing my car when I stopped?" The officer shifted in his seat. I saw you in my rearview mirror." Maya tilted her head slightly. "In your rearview mirror?" she repeated. "The footage indicates your car was traveling forward, and your line of sight would have been obstructed by the parked cars along the street. Isn't it true that you didn't actually see me at the stop sign?" The officer hesitated. His face grew visibly red as he fumbled for an answer. Finally, he blurted, "Well, you shouldn't have been in that neighborhood anyway." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge froze, his expression unreadable. Maya didn't miss a beat. "Your Honor, I request that statement be stricken from the record," she said calmly. "But I also believe it speaks volumes about the officer's motivations for pulling me over that day." The opposing attorney scrambled to their feet, their face flushed. "Your Honor, I object. This is an attempt to twist the narrative." The judge cut him off, raising a hand. "Overruled," he said firmly. His tone was measured, but there was a hint of something else, disapproval, maybe even shame. Maya returned to her seat, her expression still calm, though there was now a faint glint of determination in her eyes. She had come prepared and she wasn't done yet. As the courtroom murmurs settled, Maya stood once again, this time with a quiet confidence that commanded attention. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor," she began, "I'd like to call a witness to the stand. This individual was present at the intersection when the alleged violation occurred and can provide crucial testimony to clarify the events in question." The opposing attorney immediately stood, his expression incredulous. "A witness? Your Honor, this is highly irregular. No notice of this witness was provided." Maya remained calm. "Your Honor, The witness only came forward after seeing my social media post requesting anyone who might have seen the incident. They volunteered their testimony just 2 days ago. I ask for the court's leniency in allowing this testimony, as it directly addresses the validity of the officer's claims. The judge paused, clearly weighing the decision before nodding. I'll allow it. But proceed quickly, Miss Brooks. The courtroom door opened, and in walked a man dressed in a plain brown uniform, an older delivery driver who carried himself with the no-nonsense air of someone who had seen his fair share of the world. He took the stand, adjusted the microphone, and swore the oath. Maya approached him with a polite nod. Thank you for coming today. Could you state your name and occupation for the record? James Carter, the man said, his voice steady. I'm a delivery driver for Goldline Logistics. Been doing this job for about 20 years. Maya continued, Mr. Carter, can you tell the court where you were on the afternoon of May 3rd, around 4:15 p.m.? James nodded. I was parked on the corner of Maplewood and 7th, making a delivery to a house there. I had just gotten back into my truck when I saw the young lady's car stop at the sign. She waited a few seconds, then drove off. A cop car came out of nowhere, pulled a U-turn, and went after her. Maya's expression didn't change, but her voice carried weight. To clarify, you're certain that you saw my car stop at the stop sign? Absolutely, James replied. She came to a complete stop. No question about it. Maya gestured toward the opposing attorney. Did you see any other vehicles or pedestrians at the intersection that might have caused confusion or justified the officer's reaction? James shook his head. No, ma'am. It was just her car, the stop sign, and the cop. The courtroom buzzed again. The opposing attorney shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is hearsay. The witness is clearly biased. He volunteered to support the defendant. Maya didn't flinch. Your Honor, I anticipated this objection. That's why I also have corroborating evidence. She walked back to her table, picking up another USB drive. This is surveillance footage from a business located at the intersection of Maplewood and 7th. It was retrieved through a formal request. The timestamp aligns with the officer's report and the witness's testimony. The bailiff plugged in the drive and the monitor lit up again. The footage showed Maya's car pulling up to the stop sign, coming to a complete halt, and waiting briefly before proceeding. A few seconds later, the officer's vehicle appeared, making a sharp U-turn and accelerating after her. Maya let the footage play in silence before addressing the court again. Your Honor, this video directly contradicts the officer's testimony. It shows that I followed the law and that the officer initiated a stop without cause. The judge leaned forward, his brow furrowed as he watched the video loop. The opposing attorney looked visibly unsettled but wasn't ready to give up. This still doesn't prove any misconduct on the officer's part, he argued. It's circumstantial at best. Maya took a deep breath and turned to face the judge directly. Then allow me to provide further context, Your Honor. In my research, I came across a case from 1989, Wright v. City of Magnolia. In that case, the court ruled that a traffic stop motivated by racial profiling was unconstitutional, rendering any evidence obtained during the stop inadmissible. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. The officer's comments earlier about me not belonging in that neighborhood aligned disturbingly with the motivations outlined in Wright v. City of Magnolia. His own words suggest bias, not law enforcement. Based on this precedent, I argue that the stop itself was invalid, and the ticket should be dismissed. The room fell silent. The opposing attorney looked stunned, flipping through his notes as if searching for a rebuttal. The judge stared at Maya for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before glancing at the officer, who now looked visibly uncomfortable. Maya returned to her seat, her hands steady as she gathered her papers. The balance of power in the courtroom had shifted, and everyone could feel it. The courtroom remained tense as the judge leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped tightly on the bench. His earlier demeanor of condescension was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity as he stared down at the evidence laid before him. The surveillance footage, the witness testimony, the legal precedent. Maya had meticulously dismantled the prosecution's case. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. This court will recess for 30 minutes to review the evidence and testimony presented, he announced. His voice was steady, but there was a weight to his words now, as though even he was processing what had just transpired. The gavel struck and the room erupted into murmurs. The opposing attorney hurried to his table, flipping through his case files with growing desperation, while the officer slumped slightly in his seat, his earlier confidence completely gone. Maya, however, remained composed. She calmly collected her notes and returned to her seat, her expression betraying no hint of triumph or fatigue. During the recess, the judge sat in his chambers, the surveillance footage looping silently on a monitor in front of him. He glanced at the timestamps, cross-referenced them with the officer's report, and reread the case law Maya had cited. It was all there, clear, precise, and undeniable. But something else gnawed at him, something he couldn't shake. He thought back to the moment Maya had walked into the courtroom, alone and unrepresented, and how he'd dismissed her before she even had a chance to speak. He thought of the smirks, the assumptions, the quiet biases that had shaped the atmosphere of the trial. For the first time in a long time he felt a pang of guilt. When the court reconvened, the judge entered the room with an air of quiet authority. Gone was the dismissive look from earlier. His eyes settled briefly on Maya as she stood at her table, her hands neatly folded in front of her. There was no trace of arrogance or satisfaction on her face, just the same calm determination that had carried her through the trial. The judge adjusted his glasses and began. This court has thoroughly reviewed the evidence presented by the defendant, Miss Maya Brooks, and I must say I am both impressed and deeply moved by the clarity and precision of her arguments. A ripple of surprise passed through the courtroom. Even the opposing attorney looked caught off guard. The judge continued, his tone measured but firm. The surveillance footage, coupled with the testimony of Mr. Carter and the dashcam footage, clearly contradicts the officer's report. Furthermore, Miss Brooks's invocation of Wright versus City of Magnolia underscores a troubling pattern of bias that cannot be ignored. Her ability to identify and present this precedent speaks volumes about her legal acumen. He paused, taking a deep breath before addressing the room more broadly. This case is not just about a traffic violation. It has revealed deeper issues within our system. Issues of implicit bias and the danger of assumptions made without evidence. As officers of the court, we have a duty to ensure that justice is not only done but is seen to be done. And in this instance, the system has failed. The judge turned to Maya, his gaze softer now. Miss Brooks, you have not only defended yourself with remarkable skill but have also reminded this court of its higher purpose. It is my ruling that the ticket issued against you is dismissed, and this case is closed. He paused again, then added, I would also strongly encourage you to consider a future in law. You have the potential to do great things in this field. The courtroom was silent for a moment before a few scattered murmurs of approval broke the tension. Maya nodded respectfully, her calm exterior remaining intact, though a flicker of relief passed across her face. The opposing attorney sank back into his chair, defeated, while the officer left the courtroom with his head low, his earlier bravado reduced to shame. The judge lingered for a moment, watching Maya as she packed up her papers and walked out of the courtroom. There was no victory parade, no grand celebration, just the quiet resolve of someone who had stood alone against the odds and prevailed. As Maya stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, she took a deep breath. The weight of the trial was finally lifting, but she knew this was just one battle in a much larger fight. Still, for today she had won, and in doing so she had forced everyone in that courtroom to confront truths they might have preferred to ignore. The days following the trial brought a wave of attention that Maya Brooks never anticipated. Unbeknownst to her, a local reporter sitting in the back of the courtroom had been quietly recording her arguments. The video showing Maya's poised cross-examination and her compelling defense was uploaded to social media with the caption, 16-year-old prodigy exposes systemic bias in courtroom. Within hours the video went viral. Comments poured in from across the nation. People were captivated by her calm demeanor, her sharp intellect, and her ability to dismantle a case that had been stacked against her from the start. This girl is going places, one user wrote. Another commented, she's the future of justice. Her story became a rallying cry for young people and marginalized communities, proving that determination and knowledge could shift even the most entrenched power dynamics. National news outlets picked up the story and soon, Maya was being called a legal prodigy. Interviews flooded in, with journalists eager to hear her perspective. She politely declined most offers, choosing to remain focused on her studies and her future. Meanwhile, the fallout for the officer was swift and severe. The viral video and Maya's arguments prompted an internal investigation into his conduct. It wasn't just her case under scrutiny, other traffic stops and arrests he'd made were called into question, many of which displayed troubling patterns of racial bias. Advocates demanded accountability, and the department faced mounting pressure to address systemic issues. The opposing attorney, who had once smirked at Maya in court, faced public criticism for his dismissive attitude during the trial. His reputation took a hit as viewers online dissected his role in perpetuating bias. For Maya, the newfound attention didn't change her core values. She remained grounded, dedicating herself to her studies while balancing her unexpected fame. Offers to mentor her came from law schools and civil rights organizations across the country. While she appreciated the recognition, her focus stayed on the bigger picture, using her voice and knowledge to advocate for justice. One day during a rare interview, Maya summed up her experience. "This isn't just my story," she said. "It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to speak up when something is wrong, no matter how impossible it might seem." As her story inspired countless others, Maya quietly continued her path, determined to make a greater impact in the years ahead. And that's where we leave you today. Maya's story is a testament to resilience, brilliance, and the fight for justice. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us for more powerful narratives like this one on Just Dark. As we reflect on Maya's journey, we leave you with a quote from the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Stay vigilant, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next story.